Good evening, everybody. I think everybody found a seat, so it's great to see a really good crowd tonight. Um, Good evening and welcome to Historic Shepherdstown's fourth and final speaker series of 2023. My name is Jerry Bach, and I'm currently the president of Historic Shepherdstown Commission. And I want to thank some people that were really helpful in putting this all together tonight. From our board, Jim Broomall was extremely helpful, and I found out he has a new position with the Bird Center, so congratulations there. Keith Alexander and Tom Mays are both on the Shepherdstown Historic Landmarks Commission. They were extremely helpful. Bill Unger is our sound and our recorder tonight, so this will be available online later on. And Karen Rice of the Bird Center also was very helpful. And there were a number of people involved in the planning and production and marketing and logistics, and just make sure I'm appreciative of all of them. Tonight, in partnership with the Historic Landmarks Commission, we're excited to present John Allen discussing 18th and 19th century architectural features of the Shepherdstown Historic District. But before introducing Mr. Allen, I want to let you know about some upcoming activities of the Historic Shepherdstown Commission. We will be marching this Saturday in the Christmas parade, and we love it when members join us marching, and it's actually a lot of fun. And we'll be accompanied by a beautiful 1957 Mercury Phantom Coupe, owned and driven by Andrew Cavalunas. Again, so everyone's welcome to join us, and the parade is this Saturday at 10 o'clock. The Historic Museum will be open the next 3 weekends before we close for the winter season and reopen in April. And also the Entler is hosting a holiday marketplace, so be sure to visit the Entler this holiday season. In the museum, in addition to a wonderful maps display, if you haven't seen that, we recently purchased 2 gravy boats that were owned by Resin Davis Shepherd. He was grandson of town founder Thomas Shepherd, and also quite a benefactor to Shepherdstown as well. He made a fortune, I believe, with sugar in New Orleans, and was very generous to his hometown. And remember that, once again, we've added to our collection of Christmas ornaments. We're offering a beautiful ornament this year. We're honoring the former congregation of the Christ Reformed Church on East German Street. That congregation closed their doors after 275 years. And fortunately, CATF has taken over that building, and we're very happy that building's being put to good use and well taken care of. But that's our ornament this year, and it's beautiful, and it'll be for sale in the lobby tonight. And now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, who's well known to many of you. John C. Allen Jr. works as a preservation coordinator and architectural historian in Shepherdstown. He's conducted expansive research on historic structures in Jefferson County, and of course is well known for his wonderful book, Uncommon Vernacular, The Early Houses of Jefferson County, West Virginia, 1735 to 1835, and which is a comprehensive and meticulous exploration of our county's historic homes. He is also former chair of the Jefferson County Historical Landmarks Commission. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Allen.
Thank you all very much. Let me know if you can't hear. And thank you for braving the cold weather this evening and the four-way stop, which has gotten quite interesting recently. I want to thank Historic Shepherdstown and as well as the Landmarks Commission, Shepherdstown Landmarks Commission, for inviting me to speak. I haven't ever given a lecture on actual historic details, so the architectural details, so this is kind of new for me, and I'm excited to do it. So you all are the guinea pigs. But anyway, so I was asked to speak about these details, and I thought it would be good to start off with kind of a definition. You know, what is architectural detailing? You know, is it the little doodads that get added to a building after it's finished? Of course, there are some things that are decorative that are added that way, but really the detailing is the careful and meticulous work that the craftsmen do in putting together the building's materials, you know, the whole skin of the building. Tonight we're just going to be talking about the exterior because we only have a certain amount of time, but so it's not just superfluous work. It is really the craft of the entire construction process. And it's also a coded language, really. You can learn a lot by looking at these details about obviously the era when they were built, but also about maybe the economy of the time when they were built. Also, maybe a bit about the culture of the place. Are these people provincial? Are they bold and daring in their choices? Are they kind of held back by tradition? So anyway, these details in the built environment are clues that about the history of these people, and also the detailing gives us all kinds of other information that we'll kind of get into during the lecture. These buildings are the physical story of the town, and they are the backdrop of the people that lived here, and so they're the backdrop of our lives as well. And so it's really important that they're preserved. And I know there are a lot of homeowners here in the audience, and I really appreciate everything that you do to preserve these wonderful buildings so that we get to walk around and enjoy them, and also people in the future will as well. So I'm going to focus on, I guess I'm going to kind of cut up the lecture by era. And these are the eras that I'm demarcating. So 1785 to 1800. And 1800 is sort of arbitrary, but it's actually, you'll see when we get into the buildings themselves, there is kind of a change right at the century mark there in the architectural detailing. Then we're going to go from 1800 to 1835, and any of you that have had to slog through my book know that 1835 is a particularly good or eventful year for the county because we get the C&O Canal and the B&O Railroad at that time. So after 1835, you get a lot of materials coming into the county from places like Baltimore. And these are reflected in the buildings themselves that we have in town. So, of course, 1835 to 1860, there are lots of national trends that are happening stylistically that Shepherdstown takes a part of. And then 1860 we get, or 1861, we get the dark clouds of war coming, and not much gets built here during the war. And in fact, a lot of things get ruined and torn down because of the war. So then 1865, we stand up and dust ourselves off and try to rebuild. So I'm going to go from that year to 1880, sort of cutting the Victorian period in half and saying the early Victorian versus later, and then we'll go 1880 to 1900. Now, 1900 is an arbitrary date. I just picked it because I didn't want to keep you all here for 3 hours. Of course, so I'll start with our earliest time period. There are buildings in town that predate 1785, and there are lots of log and frame buildings here in town. Because of the nature of how they're built and how they're skinned, there's not a lot of exterior detailing to talk about. So really what we're going to be focusing on for the early period is mostly brick buildings. And during this period, which is a pretty short window of time, maybe 12 to 15 years, Shepherdstown has a remarkable collection of late 18th century brick houses, and they share a lot of common detailing. So we're going to look at these in depth. Most of these houses have these really interesting window arches over them that are applied wooden arches that are made to look like stone. In places like Alexandria, you would actually have stone carved over the windows of this period and the door. But the limestone here is really difficult to work, and it's with the tools that they had in the 1790s, it would have been nearly impossible to cut those into these very beautiful and even shapes. So they did the next best thing, which was they faked it and made him out of wood. And they did a great job because they're still there, and they must have used some very good wood to do it, because they are applied. And so that's one detail that you'll see on these brick houses of the 1790s in town. They also have really interesting details, such as the water table, which is you can see it here in the third picture. It's a step out of the foundation. And this is really a relic of, it doesn't really have any specific purpose. It's kind of a relic of ancient building. But these bricks, we had brickyards here very early on in Shepherdstown, compared to the rest of the county, and really even down into Winchester. So all these bricks were made here locally in the brickyards, and these molded bricks demarcate the water table. Now, a lot of 18th century brick buildings everywhere have water tables. That's not unusual. But the placement of the ones in Shepherdstown are kind of interesting. So if you're in the doorway of the house, they hit about mid-thigh level, and typically they would be at the door threshold level. So I'm not quite sure why they chose to put them up so high, but they did, and that's a unique characteristic of Shepherdstown buildings. They also have, these buildings also have very heavy and well crafted cornices. So if you look up kind of behind the gutter in a lot of these buildings, you're going to see some really interesting and beautiful decorative work. Some of these you can see, beautiful dentling and Greek keys, and they'll have, I think that like this, the building that the Civil War Center is in, actually has little seashell decoratives in between the medallions, and so these are really well crafted pieces, and they're heavy, they're chunky pieces. So these are very common of that period. Also, all the brick buildings that you'll see on German Street or Princess or wherever that are early will be laid in Flemish bond, which is just simply a header and a stringer, a header and a stringer that way. It's much more expensive to lay that brickwork because it takes more bricks, but that was the formal way of doing it. So the fronts of these buildings are all laid that way. Now, when you look around the side, they're not. On the side, they are laid, the early buildings are laid 3-to-1, so 3 stringer courses to a header course. As time goes on, that goes from 3 to 5 to 7 to building on the cheap. So, but these early buildings are really, really built stout. So sometimes it's easy to see which ones are which, and sometimes it's a little bit more difficult because of changes that have happened. So what is called the Chaplain House, or I call Hank Willard's old house, is a beautiful example. It still has the decorative arches over the windows. It has its original windows. It's got the water table. It's got all these features. There's a building that's right near the corner that is also a late 18th century building that has 3 different eras shown, It has its original cornice, very heavy, nice cornice, and then it's got 1850s windows that were punched into it later, an 1850s door, and then a post-Civil War storefront jammed in the front. So you will still see a little bit of the water table on either end of the building, but some of the details get taken away. So sometimes the best place to look is up in the cornice. So, we're going to look at that same building and the one next to it, right at the corner of Princess and German Street. And this is a great place, if you look up at the cornice, to see the difference between the late 18th century and the early 19th century. So in the yellow, that's the heavy 18th century cornice with big chunky medallions and the dental work. Right next to it, just 10 years after, you see a much lighter, more delicate cornice work. And this cornice and other detailing is going to get lighter and lighter until it just disappears altogether into the 19th century. Okay, so now we are in the 19th century, and really at this point, there is a pretty clear demarcation where a building that was built just a few years after is going to look different detail-wise. This is a wonderful house on the corner of Church and German, and it was built in 1816. You can see the windows are significantly bigger. It still has the Flemish bronze front, but the sides are now 5-to-1 instead of 3-to-1. And the cornice has gotten much smaller. Here's another house on German Street that you can see the original windows. This is a house from about 1820. And the original windows are on the second floor. The first floor windows got enlarged. Someone wanted a little bit more light downstairs. But in this period, up to 1835, you're going to start seeing things like fan lights, things that wouldn't have been available here in the 18th century. A good example of this is the Solomon Entler House, which is on New Street, wonderful brick house, and this is the earliest use of fan light that I encountered in the county. This is an elliptical fan light, and you would think, because you see these in a lot of historic houses, you would think, well, there are tons of these, and they must have used them for a lot of the 19th century. But really, it was about a 10-year window that fan lights were used, and then they fell out of favor. Again, this house, Flemish bronze on the front and 5-to-1 coursing on the sides. Okay, so now the old manse that's also on New Street, which is the unpainted brick house here. What started to happen in this time period, this is about 1815. This is a really early use of a brick cornice. So they actually used molded bricks instead of the wood, which obviously reduced the maintenance of it. Wonderful house. And then the yellow painted brick house, which is on German, is about 1830, 1832, something like that. And here you can see the door surround now has side lights. This is a new idea, and even side lights on the upper window above it to balance it. And you can see really clearly the cornice. This is about the end of a medallion cornice in the county. So this is the last vestige of that 18th century detailing. After that, the cornices will be plain. There won't be anything up there. So that gets us to the time period when the train and the canal get here, and we are inundated with stuff from Baltimore, hinges and doors and window sashes and marble mantles and all kinds of things that weren't here before. However, as all these items were coming into the county, you would kind of think that, we would be showing off all this new stuff outside. But Shepherdstown was very traditional, and by that I mean, in this time period, 1835 to 1860, there's all this new stuff that's available, and some of that stuff was purchased and went inside the house, but on the outside it was as if nothing changed. So this was quite provincial detailing on the exterior of these buildings, not showing off for your neighbors. Places like Charlestown, you get some more grand houses, and even out in the countryside, you get some very bold architecture. But in Shepherdstown, it was more understated, shall we say. So here's a good example of 1840s and 50s architecture in the town. Not much in the way of detailing. Most of everything has been stripped away. The red painted brick house here, I think, dates to about 1841, and it has a brick dentil, and that's about it as far as detailing goes. So you might wonder, what about the Greek Revival? And this is something that you see all over the rest of the county. You see it all over Frederick County, Virginia. You see it in Clark County, Virginia. You see it in Frederick County, Washington County, Maryland. Greek Revival was a major fad that happened in the 1830s and 40s in the rest of the U.S. There's not much Greek Revival in Shepherdstown, and there is one doorway I found that was added onto a later building, but you would think that a building like this, the Presbyterian Church, which was built in 1836 or finished in that year, this is a perfect example of a building that should be Greek Revival. This building should have a big pedimented front portico on it with columns coming down, and it's a Greek temple. You turn your church into a Greek temple, as most of the churches did in that time period, up and down the valley. Not in Shepherdstown. This looks more like a house, right? They're keeping it simple, and it's a lovely building and very well built. But they were not trying to impress people with a new flash in the pan type of architecture that might, go out of fashion in 5 or 10 years. Very interesting. On the other side of the coin, you have what is now called McMurrin Hall, which our good friend Resin Davis Shepherd, benefactor of the town, gave to the town, and it has everything you could possibly throw at a building. It's got it on there. Full-on Corinthian capital columns. You have, acanthus sleeve brackets holding up the pediment over the door. You've got inlaid brick panels. You've got pilasters that finish down at the bottom with big molded bases that are actually cast iron. This is a fancy building for a little town, and but obviously Resin was used to buildings in Boston and in New Orleans, so these are big city buildings that came to our little town, and fortunately they do, because it's a wonderful building. At the same time that building is going up, the Trinity Episcopal Church is going up. This is another building that is a little fancy for little old Shepherdstown. You can see in the historic photograph, or the very early photograph, the little log building sitting beside it looks a little sad next to this giant steeple. But an excellent sort of country Gothic church, something that you would have seen in England. A lovely building that we are blessed with, and so an interesting take on some people are very traditional and other people are very bold, and they sometimes live in the same town. So that gets us right up to the Civil War, and of course the Civil War didn't go easy on us, and I don't really know how many buildings we lost in town itself, but we lost a lot of buildings outside of town. And you would think that it would take the town a while to kind of dust off and rebuild. But they got building right away. And when they started building back, they started building in the national style, which at the time was Italianate. So these are two good examples of that. The War Memorial Building and what is now, I guess, I don't know what they call it, the parsonage or something. So the 1870s, 1860s, late 1860s, early 1870s Italianate, you'll see a lot of the telltale signs of this style are arched windows and also these big decorative brackets that are underneath the soffit there. There are two great examples. Oh, I'll get to that in a second. Sorry. You'll see these details all over Shepherdstown, these arched windows with the brackets. The more national style that you see has those two features, but also very flat roofs. And there's several buildings in Charlestown that are like this: deep eaves, and that you put these big brackets on, a flat roof, and the arched windows. In Shepherdstown, they went with the arched windows and the brackets, but they kept the roof exactly the way that they had built them for the last 100 years before that. And I just think that's a pretty interesting take on the style. So down on East German, there are two great examples of Italianate big houses that were built, right after the war, with really great brick detailing. And again, it was surprising to me to find how many of these buildings were built right after the war. We have some really great commercial buildings that are built in the Italianate style as well. I guess the old newspaper building has wonderful brickwork. If you stand across the road and look at all the detail in the building, there's this small 2-story shop there that was all built, to have a family living above and the store below, and then you have another wonderful 3-story commercial building with an arcade below and great detailing. So I thought I would throw this one in because it's a head scratcher. This one is on either Prospect or Fairmont. I don't know, and maybe the owner is here tonight. I don't know, but anyway, it's a great house. This is after the Civil War, so now we're in flat out just common bond on the front. So they're not even messing with even attempting to do anything fancy on the with the bond work. So this is common bond. This is also machine-made brick. So this is a very slick brick that you could get here. Certainly not before the 1850s or so. But it's got these 1790s windows. What is going on here? So probably when they were knocking buildings down on German Street to put these big commercial buildings in, they're knocking down some nice old 1790s houses to make room for them. And either the builder or the owner of this building said, "Those are perfectly good windows. I think we'll use those in my house," even though they're about 90 years out of fashion. So I think it's great that they did. They had to clip some of the keystones off to get them to fit, but they actually did use the old windows, which is wonderful. So in the future, some architectural historian will really get thrown for a loop on this one. There is another big fad during the 1870s in building, and this was called Second Empire. This is after Napoleon III's empire in France, where he kind of took the wrecking ball to Paris. And when they rebuilt, there were a lot of these buildings with mansard roofs, like this one. And I spent a lot of time in the Hudson Valley of New York recently, and every little town you go through, there are 5 or 6 Second Empire houses and or public buildings. And it was very popular all over the country. This is our one and only mansard roof. Well, actually, that's not true. Our only historic mansard roof in the county, right there on the corner of Princess and German Street. So, and it's a really great building. A lot of good decorative brickwork and detailing on it as well. The other mansard roof, I think, is Tommy's Pizza, which is almost may be historic now. I don't know. But it's not Second Empire, but it's okay. So that gets us into the sort of late Victorian period, and here you've got lots of details that they're using shingles, they're using brackets, they're throwing German siding up, they're doing all kinds of crazy porch detailing, and it's a bit of a mixed match. So we've got also some Gothic elements that are happening, and some people would say Carpenter Gothic. If anyone has not been out to see the newly renovated Elmwood Cemetery caretaker's house or overseer's house, it's a really nice building and very, very well done. Applaud them for the work they did on that building, because it's a jewel. So the late Victorian period, you're getting lots of turned elements and lots of applied elements. These are a lot of them coming, on the train or getting here and in boxes after being ordered out of a catalog and being applied to porches and soffits and things like that, and inside the home as well. But great detailing. I could have done 25 slides of just of the porch work. And of course, the porches are, for a lot of buildings, second and third porches. So you can have a really early building with a Victorian porch on it. So, and all those things tell you bits and pieces about the town and when people were rebuilding and when they had the money to do things and when they didn't have the money to do things. Here's another good example of things coming from outside the county. This is a cast iron storefront that came from Evansville, Indiana, and was probably ordered and applied to the Welshans building. So that gets us up to 1900. At that point, we're, still following the national trends, but we get some surprising things happening in town. There's craftsman houses being built and all kinds of things that you wouldn't think of as being Shepherdstown architecture, but they're all important in their own way as they tell the story of the town. So I think that kind of brings me to the end, and I just wanted to say that I hope that as you take your next walk down the streets of Shepherdstown, our home, that you'll take a minute to look at the details and think about the people that came before us and thank them maybe in your mind for doing such a good job and giving us such a beautiful place to live. And I hope that you have a little bit deeper connection now with those people that built those houses and buildings and came before us. So that's it. That's it. And I'm supposed to take questions if people have questions and if I can answer them. Uh-oh, Dan Tokar. I'm in trouble.
Well, what I was going to ask about is when you see, as you say, provincial versus the big city kind of things, quite often it is the materials, like whether it is stone or wood that they're using. The fan lights you had, I've worked on enough of those where, to me, the difference between the wood-framed ones and the leaded ones, and sometimes they're leaded with little ornaments that are soldered on, and you say, okay, somebody's been to the big city if they've got cute little lead ornaments in the fan lights.
Yep.
This is not somebody who's trying to fake it. They're really doing things, and I still haven't pieced out whether how much of that was done locally and how much of it was just brought in wholesale, because we might have had somebody doing leaded glass work, but I know we had a lot of people making sash and door and window stuff. So I don't know if you've had any insights about whether we had local production of what you could think of as high-end material, because even if it's in small quantities, I can attest that there is a market for small amounts of really high-quality stuff, no matter what the era.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think you may not remember, but you made me some replacement leaded pieces for a fan light on a house, and that house had been remodeled by Resin Davis Shepherd, so I'm pretty sure that stuff did come from out of the county, because it had Boston locks, mortise locks in the doors of the house, which for that time period, to have mortise locks here was pretty rare. So yeah, a lot of that stuff did come in, but yeah, I don't know, other than the stuff that is signed, and Dan knows a lot more about the hardware aspect of this than I do, but it's hard to know sometimes what was made here and what came from away. But I had, right after houses that were built right after the train got here, you start seeing stamped hinges, Baldwin hinges, and you start seeing all that stuff right away. I mean, it happened very quickly. Sue.
Where were the brickyards?
I think there was
During the a really early period. In other words, the bricks in my house. Where do you think they were?
so. Yeah, I don't know exactly, but there was one, I think, where the JSB building is. There was one there, just south of there. Yeah, and then there was I don't know where the other one was on the other, on the other side of town. But yeah, and they were there. I mean, they may have even been there earlier. I think the only thing that I found was there was a mention in a deed dispute, and they mentioned that the brickyard was the boundary, and that was in the early 1780s. So it could have been there 10 years earlier. But there's no record of it. So, but that's pretty for the valley. That's very early for brick. There's almost no early brick stuff in Winchester.
Got a question about roofing materials. We were doing a cleanup of the attic at the Entler and found a pile of rubble of terracotta, what appears to be roofing tiles.
Oh, wow.
Found a couple of whole ones. And I was wondering if you have any experience with late 18th century terracotta tiles.
No, that's something I have not heard of. Yeah, the things of course they don't spend a lot of time in documents talking about. There's insurance records that mention what kind of, and really they just say they're either slate or they're wooden shingles. So no, I've not heard that. Now, in places like New Orleans, yeah, they used them on the right at the peak to protect that part. But yeah, it's certainly possible. Obviously the Weiss were making all kinds of pottery. They could have easily made those locally.
Seem to be handmade.
Yeah, that's a cool find.
Did the log houses, do you think they had exposed logs for a period of time, or did they generally always develop
Yeah, so I think if you could afford it, you probably you would have put siding on it as soon as you could. The, one of my mentors, who was a great architectural historian, told me the worst thing that ever happened to log buildings was Abraham Lincoln. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, because everyone tore the siding off their buildings, and they were now proud of their log cabins. He said, and that's when they rotted. So I think most of them were, and because it was a obviously a humble building material, but very useful. But you could pretty quickly dress it up and make it look like it was a frame house, or if you're George Washington, you could make it look like it was a stone house.
Where do you think the inspiration came for the change that was adopted locally? If anybody that's built a new house knows there's too many damn things to deal with. And so usually you rely on the contractor. So are these adoptions of certain techniques or styles, do you think they came from the contractor, or did they come simply the property owner themselves was making these decisions about adopting the style?
Well, I think early on there was probably not a whole lot of talk about detailing. There was, they would sign contracts that said, in a neat and workmanlike manner. So they were going to build, in a very innocuous way, basically. But then once you get into the time where you get catalogs and you can order stuff, then I'm sure people are picking things out and handing it to the builder and saying, put these on. They're picking stuff out, and that's when you start getting really interesting things that you're kind of turn your head and you're like, wait, but this has got both Gothic and you start getting amalgamations of things that you wouldn't probably put together if you didn't just like them in a catalog. But there were also some very sophisticated owners that wanted very specific things. Obviously, the most famous situation in the 18th century in Shepherdstown, where there was a man named Spalding who built a house that still stands up on near the four-way stop, and he wanted so many good things in his house that he went broke, and so he had to sell it before he actually lived in it. So, and it has everything you could want. So he probably was asking for those things, or his contractor was just taking him to the cleaner. It's one of the two.
This isn't the kind of detail you were talking about, but for the homes that were built back in the 1700s, are there any records of the range of colors that were applied to window frames, doors, etc., like that? Do you know anything about how widely they varied?
Well, I think it varied as much as you had money to do them. There are books on that. That's not something that I know much about, but I do know that there were pigments that were very expensive, and the iron oxide was a very typical paint here because it was cheap to make, and most of these brick buildings would have been painted with iron oxide wash after they were done, and then the lines were then painted on after, because to them having bricks of different colors looked kind of cheap, and so you washed it so that everything was one single color, and then painted on the lines to make it look like that was the mortar. So in places underneath that have been protected by either wooden framing or by porches, you can still see they called it penciling. But almost all of these buildings would have been and it's not really a paint, it's more of a wash, just to give it that uniform color. So the question is, how early were cellars incorporated into homes? From the very beginning, yeah. So almost every house in the county up until probably the Second World War had a limestone foundation, and that most of the time that limestone came from the cellar. They were digging the cellar out and they were quarrying the stone as they went, because hard to find a place in Jefferson County that if you don't get down a foot, you're not going to hit stone. So yeah, and a lot of the early houses, the kitchen was in the cellar, and then so they would have a summer kitchen for when it was hot or when it wasn't hot outside, and then cook in the basement. And then about 1820, they started attaching the kitchen to the house, and I think that kind of went back to the question about the roofing. They would paint. They had all kinds of different mixtures to paint the roofs with to try to keep fire suppression. Was a serious thing, obviously. Yes.
The green building that had the mansard roof.
Yes.
It's so symmetrical. And yet there's, on one side, there's that intricate brickwork that's now painted and you can really notice it. Any idea why that is there?
Well, let's take a look at it. If you look at it, it's actually asymmetrical. The fenestration on it, or the window and door placement. Yeah, and that was kind of part of the appeal of that style. I think was, throwing asymmetry into, which got even more popular as the Victorian era went on. Lots of turrets and round things and bay windows and all kinds of unusual things. But yeah, it has some really interesting checkerboard brickwork, and the corner is really neat, and it has a cut stone which came from somewhere else, but cut stone, beautiful stone base on the building as well.
Was this a residence or a public building?
It looks like a residence, but I don't know what it was. Jim, do you know?
That's the Tolliver's Ice Cream
Candy store.
Shop and Restaurant. And there's a photograph that from like 1907. The corner was actually the entrance, was the entrance to the building.
Okay.
Store, and I think this little close pairing of windows is all part of that entrance.
Okay. There you go. Yeah, it's a really interesting building, and why sometimes buildings that are not in keeping with the local, with all the other buildings, sometimes they become really important and interesting after the fact. Once you get down the road a ways, it's interesting in that regard. Any other questions, or am I?
I assume that you do have some houses in Shepherdstown that are pebble dashed. Why did they do that to the stone houses?
Pebble Dash. I don't know what that is.
Stone, and I guess it has little stones and cement.
Oh, so there's this kind of later stucco stuff that they did. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I see that sometime, but I think that was a kind of an early 20th century thing. I think I don't. So I don't really know. I think they, a lot of buildings, it was sort of like, that's an easy way to kind of make everything kind of symmetrical or not symmetrical, but, uniform. So if you've punched holes and done things with windows and doors, then you can just kind of cover all that up with that kind of stucco. But
Are we seeing the Sears Roebuck houses?
that's way after my line of yeah no, and I'm on shaky ground, and even in the 1890s too, so
When did the German style siding, what period is that?
that's definitely post-war, yeah, so post-Civil War, yeah, you don't see that in early, but it was incredibly popular here, yeah. But yeah, the early siding is either the nice stuff is beaded on the bottom, but just standard lap siding. The really early siding is cool because it's in little strips about this long, and it's lapped this way and lapped on the side, so it's actually cut this way and lapped in that direction too. So it's really, but very, very little of that remains. Keith.
What do you think are some of the most important and pressing preservation challenges for these structures and the detailing?
Money. Yeah, I mean, it really is, keeping coats of paint on things and brick. Yeah, I would say for brick, it's staying away from hard mortar. People don't believe it, and masons don't believe it, but you can't use modern hard mortar with these old bricks. It just destroys them. So you've got to use soft mortar. So if you're ever doing any repointing on a brick building and they tell you, oh, no, this is strong, it's good, say, no, I don't want Portland cement in this. And then you got to watch and make sure they don't put it in because they don't believe you. But it causes the brick to spall because if the mortar is harder than the brick, then something's got to give when expansion and contraction, and the face of the brick will pop off. And there's a lot of examples of that in Shepherdstown, unfortunately. But yeah, there's plenty of issues, as you know.
Did they import any of the brick at any point, or were they able to build it or make the brick all here?
Yeah, so they did import brick, and
Did that come from Baltimore?
a lot of it came from Baltimore. Yeah, machine-made brick, and they used it, a lot of it in Harper's Ferry, a little bit less in Charlestown, and a lot less here, because it was just.
Was it from Baltimore Brick Company?
I don't know the answer to that. The only thing I've seen are the receipt, the ledgers, I guess, from the B&O company, where they're hauling brick, and they don't say, yeah, who specifically sold it, but where it was going.
How
So-
early is the brick for the Jefferson Security Bank? 'Cause I use some of that in my house. It's in Williamsport. Is that fairly late 1900s?
Which Jefferson Security Bank? The one.
It was
Oh, I don't.
one
That's, yeah, that's probably like 1980s or something.
No, it's earlier than that.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. That's again past my time. Thank you, though.
Prior to 1835, who were the actual builders and laborers who built these places?
That's a great question, and I wish I knew. That there are places where they kept records of those things, but they just didn't here. So it's occasionally you will find a little home ledger that someone kept on a farm, and they'll say, I paid Jack to build me 6 window sashes, and I paid Joe to cut me some siding. But that's about it. There's no last names. There's very little record, unfortunately. And I'm sure that there was a lot of enslaved labor that was used, but people just didn't write that stuff down too much. So, anything else? Let me off easy.